Hello, everyone. I'm Alex, and today I want to share with you a story that speaks to the heart of resilience, self-worth, and new beginnings. Madeline Hayes believed she had built a strong life, one of success, love, and stability. But in a single moment, everything unraveled. A photograph exposed not just her husband's betrayal, but the painful truth that those she trusted most had deceived her. Faced with heartbreak, she could have crumbled. Instead, she chose herself. This is a story of strength, dignity, and quiet triumph. It reminds us that even in our most painful moments, we have the power to rise, to reclaim what was lost, and to step into a future that belongs solely to us. Message: you are stronger than betrayal, worthy of love, and capable of rebuilding a life where your happiness is no longer dependent on others. The skyline of Manhattan stretched before Madeline Hayes, its steel and glass towers casting long shadows over the streets below. From her high-rise office, she watched the world move, people rushing to meetings, cabs honking impatiently, the city pulsing with a rhythm she had long since mastered. For years, she had lived by the same principles that governed this place: control, precision, and the understanding that power was never given, it was taken. She turned her gaze to the framed wedding photo on her desk. It had been 6 years since that day, since she had stood beside Nathan Carter in an ivory gown, promising a life built on trust. He had been charming, ambitious, a man who knew how to sell an illusion. At the time, she had allowed herself to believe in it. To believe in him. But now, staring at the image, all she saw were the details she had ignored: the hesitation in his smile, the distant look in her own eyes, the subtle but ever-present disapproval on her parents' faces. Madeline had learned early that love in her family was not freely given but earned. Her younger sister, Jessica, had always been the golden child, the one who could do no wrong, the one their parents protected. Meanwhile, Madeline had been expected to fend for herself, to succeed without applause, to endure without complaint. It was a skill she had carried into adulthood, one that had served her well in business, but left her vulnerable in the one place it mattered most: her personal life. Her phone vibrated. A message from Nathan. Flight got delayed. Chicago trip's a mess. Don't wait up. She exhaled slowly, placing the phone face down on the desk. Another business trip. Another excuse. A sip of espresso, now cold. A glance at the clock, past midnight in London, where she had once dreamed of traveling together. A reflexive movement of her hand, opening Facebook, scrolling absently. And then, she saw it. A hospital bed. A newborn wrapped in white linen. Welcome to the world, baby Oliver. We are so blessed. The name attached to the post sent ice through her veins. Jessica Reynolds. Her sister. Holding a child. With their parents beside her, beaming. But it was not their faces that made Madeline's breath still. It was the black leather wallet on the bedside table, barely visible but unmistakable. Nathan's wallet. Her vision sharpened. The world did not slow, it crystallized. This was not an ending. It was the beginning of something else entirely. Madeline stared at the screen, her mind momentarily refusing to process what her eyes had already understood. The hospital room. The baby. Her parents' radiant smiles. And there, on the bedside table, sat a wallet she had given Nathan last Christmas, a sleek black leather piece embossed with his initials. A rational part of her whispered that it could be a coincidence. Perhaps a similar wallet, a generic design. But Madeline wasn't the type to ignore details, and this wasn't just a wallet, it was Nathan's. She knew it as intimately as she knew the scent of his cologne, the cadence of his voice, the subtle way he adjusted his cufflinks when he was nervous. Her fingers trembled slightly as she clicked on the photo, enlarging it, scrutinizing every inch. And then she saw it, right beside the wallet, half hidden by a hospital brochure, was a keychain. A small, silver Chicago skyline charm. The one Nathan had bought during his so-called business trip 3 months ago. The trip that had seemed unnecessary even then, when he had left in a hurry with vague explanations and came back unusually subdued. A slow, creeping numbness spread through her. For years, she had trained herself to suppress emotions, to compartmentalize. It was a skill honed through a childhood of being overlooked and a career that demanded absolute composure. She was not impulsive. She was not reckless. She dealt with facts. And right now, the facts were forming a clear and undeniable picture. Jessica had just given birth. Nathan's wallet and keychain were in the hospital room. Her parents were there, fully aware. The betrayal was so intricate, so complete, that for a long moment, Madeline felt nothing at all. Her phone vibrated on the desk. A text from Nathan. "Hope your day's going okay. Meeting ran late. I'll call you tonight." The audacity of it. The ease with which he lied. She exhaled slowly, fingers tightening around the phone before she forced herself to release it. If there was one thing she knew, it was that anger, when channeled correctly, was power. She would not react emotionally. Not yet. Instead, she moved with deliberate precision. She reached for her own phone and, with practiced ease, captured a screenshot of the post. Then another, this time zooming in on the wallet and keychain. She took a deep breath, steadied herself and typed a brief, detached comment beneath the photo. "Congratulations. Wishing you all the best." She hit send. It was a calculated move, a message that would appear normal to anyone looking in. No one would suspect that, behind those words, she had just confirmed the end of her marriage. Closing Facebook, she turned back to her desk, her mind shifting into its natural mode, strategy, planning, control. She had built her career on uncovering discrepancies, analyzing patterns, finding weaknesses in corporate structures. Now, she would apply those same skills to the mess that had become her personal life. Her next steps had to be precise. First, information. She needed evidence, real, undeniable proof that would hold up in court, in negotiations, in every confrontation that was to come. She could not afford a misstep. Her position, her reputation, her very future depended on it. She reached for the sleek black business card holder in her drawer, flipping through the neatly arranged cards until she found the one she needed. Blackstone Investigations. She had worked with them before, not on personal matters, but on high-stakes compliance cases that had required discretion and efficiency. If there was anyone who could uncover the full truth, it was them. Madeline tapped the number into her phone. A crisp voice answered on the second ring. "Blackstone Investigations, this is John Blackstone speaking." She allowed herself a moment, just one, to steel her resolve. Then, her voice came, even and measured. "John, it's Madeline Hayes. I need a personal investigation. Discretion is paramount." There was a brief pause, then the calm response of a man who had heard it all before. "Understood. What are we looking at?" She glanced once more at her screen, at the image that had shattered the last remnants of her illusion. "Infidelity," she said simply. "I need everything you can find." Blackstone didn't ask unnecessary questions. "I'll assign my best team. Let's start with the basics, travel records, financial transactions, phone history. I assume you want a full background check on the other party as well." Madeline's jaw tightened. "Yes. And I want to know if my parents were aware." Another pause. "Then, we'll get started immediately." She ended the call, exhaling slowly. The first step was done. The wheels were already in motion. Her phone buzzed again. Another message from Nathan. "Flight delayed again. Looks like I won't be back until tomorrow. Miss you." Madeline allowed herself the smallest, coldest smile. By the time he returned, she would have everything she needed. And when she finally confronted him, she would not be asking for explanations. She would be ending things on her terms. Madeline had always believed in facts. Numbers, records, indisputable data, these were the pillars of her professional success. But standing at the precipice of personal betrayal, she understood something new. Facts could be cold, but they could also be liberating. And now, she needed them more than ever. The morning after her call to Blackstone Investigations, she awoke earlier than usual, her mind sharp and focused. There was no hesitation, no lingering hope that she had misunderstood the situation. The past 24 hours had stripped her of any illusions. Nathan had lied. Jessica had betrayed her. Her parents had enabled it. The only question left was how long it had been going on and how deeply they were entangled. Her phone buzzed, a message from John Blackstone. Preliminary findings available. Meet at noon. She typed back a simple, confirmed. No unnecessary words. No emotion. The hours leading up to the meeting were methodical. She cancelled her afternoon meetings, rescheduled a client call, and filed reports with the kind of ruthless efficiency that had earned her respect in the corporate world. If anyone noticed that she was more reserved than usual, they said nothing. And if they did, she wouldn't have cared. At exactly noon, she stepped into Blackstone Investigations, a discreet office tucked between high-rise firms and boutique law offices. The walls were lined with framed case studies and awards, a testament to their meticulous work. John Blackstone greeted her with the same professional detachment she appreciated. He was a man in his early 50s, graying at the temples, his suit tailored but practical. His handshake was firm, his gaze sharp. "Madeline," he said, motioning toward the private conference room. "Let's get started." She followed him inside, taking a seat at the polished mahogany table. A thick manila folder sat in front of him, a silent harbinger of what was to come. "Here's what we have so far," he began, opening the folder. Nathan Carter did not board any flights to Chicago in the past 6 months. His company's travel records list the trip, but there's no corresponding booking under his name. Instead, he was at the Langston Hotel, downtown, within walking distance of Memorial Hospital. "We pulled security footage." He slid a set of printed images toward her. Madeline didn't flinch as she studied them. Nathan, dressed in his usual tailored suit, checking in. A few hours later, Jessica entering the same lobby, wearing a long coat that barely concealed the curve of her pregnancy. Another image, Nathan and Jessica together at the hotel bar, leaning in close, their body language unmistakable. She nodded, expression unreadable. "Continue." Blackstone flipped the page. Financial records confirm a pattern of high-end purchases, restaurants, jewelry, baby boutiques. The most notable expenses: a nursery furniture set delivered to an apartment leased under Jessica's name 6 months ago. The rent is paid for by a bank account Nathan set up last year. He's been financing her living expenses for at least 10 months. A slow exhale. So this wasn't recent. This wasn't a lapse in judgment. It was deliberate. Planned. "Phone records?" she asked. Blackstone handed over another set of documents. "Frequent calls. Texts. Over 500 in the past 12 months. The most notable detail: Jessica's number was registered under a secondary contact name in Nathan's records. He went out of his way to conceal it. Madeline turned the pages, absorbing the reality of it. Each piece fit together with cruel precision, forming a picture of betrayal so clear, so intentional, that she almost marveled at the audacity of it. "And my parents?" Blackstone hesitated, then pushed forward another set of documents. "They were aware, at least to some extent. Your mother sent messages to Jessica throughout her pregnancy, conversations that suggest she knew Nathan was involved. The phrasing was careful, but it's evident they weren't just bystanders." Madeline read the messages in silence. "We'll take care of you, sweetheart. Don't stress about anything. Just focus on the baby." And another, Weeks later. Nathan is doing the right thing. Madeline will move on in time. She always does. A slow, creeping disgust settled in her stomach. So that was how they saw her. Someone to be managed. Someone to be discarded. She set the papers down and folded her hands in front of her. Her voice, when she spoke, was level. This is enough. Proceed with the full background analysis. I want complete records. Financials, employment, medical if it's legal. I need leverage. Blackstone studied her carefully. Most clients in your position react emotionally. You're remarkably composed. She offered a cold, almost amused smile. I spent my entire life being told to control my emotions. It's finally paying off. He nodded. Understood. We'll finalize the full report in 72 hours. She stood, smoothing the front of her coat. Make it 48. Madeline left the office and stepped onto the bustling street, the cold autumn air sharp against her skin. She had the information she needed. Now, it was time to decide what to do with it. She walked with purpose, her mind already constructing the next steps. This was no longer just about Nathan or Jessica. It was about reclaiming what was hers, her autonomy, her power, her dignity. And when the time came, she wouldn't just walk away. She would make sure they understood exactly what they had lost. Madeline had spent years walking into rooms where she wasn't expected to speak first. In boardrooms filled with executives who assumed they were the smartest people there, she had learned the power of silence. Let them talk. Let them reveal themselves. Let them dig their own graves. Today was no different. She stepped into her parents' house with the kind of measured composure that came from years of suppressing emotions. The home was exactly as she remembered, polished hardwood floors, meticulously arranged furniture, family portraits lining the walls like relics of a life that had never truly belonged to her. The scent of freshly brewed coffee lingered in the air, warm and familiar, though there was nothing warm about what was about to unfold. Her father sat in his usual chair, the same spot where he had read the newspaper every morning for as long as she could remember. Her mother stood near the kitchen, hands folded neatly in front of her as if preparing for Sunday brunch. Jessica, dressed in a fitted postpartum dress that still attempted to exude effortless charm, sat with the baby cradled in her arms. And then there was Nathan, standing by the window, his back to her, shoulders stiff. They had all gathered, exactly as she had requested. None of them knew what was coming. She placed her handbag on the table, moving with deliberate ease, and pulled out a thick manila folder. She didn't sit. Thank you all for being here, she said, her voice smooth, detached. Her mother attempted a smile, though it wavered at the edges. Madeline, this is unexpected. We assumed you'd be. What? Busy? Uninterested? Madeline cut in smoothly. That would have been convenient for you. Jessica shifted in her seat. Maddie, look, I know. Stop. It was a single word, but it sliced through the room with precision. Jessica's mouth shut instantly. Madeline pulled out the first set of documents and placed them on the table. Let's start with this. A lease agreement for an apartment paid for by Nathan. 6 months' worth of rent transactions. She flipped to the next page. Financial records. Thousands of dollars in purchases for baby supplies, maternity care, luxury gifts. All charged to a credit card linked to Nathan's private account. Another page. Phone records. Over 500 calls exchanged between the two of you in the past year. Jessica looked away. Nathan finally turned from the window, but his face betrayed nothing. Madeline continued, voice unwavering. And then there's this. She placed a final set of documents on the table. Messages. From you, Mom. Encouraging Jessica. Telling her Nathan was doing the right thing. That I would move on. That I always do. Her mother's face went pale. For a moment, the room was silent. No one reached for the documents. No one tried to defend themselves. And then Nathan spoke. "Madeline." She tilted her head slightly, cutting him off before he could begin whatever empty justification he had prepared. "Before you embarrass yourself further, let me be clear. I am not here to discuss feelings. I don't need explanations. I don't need apologies." She exhaled slowly, her gaze steady. "This is a transaction. And I always finish my transactions." Jessica's grip on the baby tightened. "This isn't just business, Maddie. There's a child involved." Madeline let out a quiet, humorless laugh. "How convenient for you. Did you think that would change the consequences?" She stepped closer, her voice lowering just enough to be sharp. "You were always jealous. Always searching for some way to make me smaller. You finally found your way, didn't you?" Jessica's expression flickered, anger, guilt, something unspoken, but she said nothing. Madeline turned back to Nathan. "Divorce papers will be delivered by the end of the week. I expect full cooperation. You will not contest any of the financial terms. If you do, I will ensure your professional reputation is permanently damaged." She paused. "It's already taken a hit. Your firm has been informed." Nathan paled. That was the reaction she had been waiting for. Madeline turned to her parents. "As for you, I hope this was worth it. The house? You'll have to sell it. I assume you know what financial ruin looks like when credibility is lost." Her father shifted uncomfortably. Her mother, for the first time in her life, had nothing to say. She let the silence stretch, forcing them to sit with their decisions. And then, just as smoothly as she had arrived, she picked up her handbag and turned toward the door. She paused only once, her hand on the doorknob. She looked at Jessica. "I would have given you anything, you know. If you had just asked." Jessica's breath hitched, but Madeline didn't stay to see the reaction. She stepped out into the cold air, the weight of years of betrayal finally lifting. This wasn't just about revenge. This was about reclaiming herself. Madeline had always understood power, not just the kind that came with title and influence, but the quiet kind. The power of patience. Of precision. Of knowing when to strike. The aftermath of that confrontation at her parents' house did not shake her. She had walked away with clarity, not regret. But clarity demanded action. This was not about anger. It was about dismantling what needed to be broken and ensuring that those who had betrayed her felt the weight of their own decisions. The next morning, she arrived at her office earlier than usual, the city still shaking off the remnants of dawn. The floor-to-ceiling windows framed the skyline, but she barely noticed. Instead, she sat at her desk, took a slow sip of coffee, and methodically laid out her plan. Her legal team had already drawn up the divorce papers. There would be no negotiation, no attempts at reconciliation. The settlement terms were non-negotiable. She would take the house, the investments, and a substantial financial payout for the betrayal. Nathan, already reeling from the sudden revelation that his firm had been made aware of his indiscretions, had no leverage to fight back. His career, once polished and unshakable, was already showing cracks. At exactly 9 a.m., she sent a final confirmation email to her lawyer. Proceed with immediate filing. No delays. She had given Nathan a choice: sign the agreement quietly or watch his professional reputation crumble further. Either way, she would win. By noon, the first consequence arrived. Nathan called twice. She let it go to voicemail. His messages were frantic, an unraveling man grasping at control he no longer had. By the end of the day, his name was circulating in the industry. His firm, upon reviewing his financial discrepancies, had placed him on indefinite leave. A quiet but effective message was sent through their professional circles: Nathan Carter was not to be trusted. By the following week, he was out. It would have been easy to say Jessica wasn't her problem, that the consequences of her actions would unfold naturally. But Madeline had spent her entire life being dismissed, her achievements overshadowed, her emotions disregarded. That would not happen again. A call to the board of nursing ensured that Jessica's unethical relationship with Nathan was formally documented. A second call, this time to the hospital's HR department, sealed her fate. Hospitals valued discretion, but they valued integrity more. By noon, Jessica's suspension was made official, pending full review. Her apartment, paid for by Nathan, was no longer secure. With his accounts frozen and his career in freefall, the luxury lifestyle Jessica had built on deception was crumbling beneath her. That evening, Madeline received an email. From Jessica Reynolds. Subject, please. She didn't bother opening it. She hadn't planned on doing anything more. Their shame, their loss of standing in the community, the whispers that would follow them at every social gathering, that should have been enough. But then, another file landed on her desk. A final report from Blackstone Investigations. She skimmed through it, her gaze sharp. Their finances were fragile, far more fragile than they had ever let on. Years of maintaining a perfect suburban facade had drained their resources, and they had been quietly leveraging loans against the house. A house that, as it turned out, was still in her name. They had assumed she would never question it. That she would never care enough to look. She closed the file, exhaled slowly, and picked up the phone. By the time the call ended, the decision had been made. The house would be sold. Her parents, stripped of their carefully cultivated image, would have no choice but to leave behind the life they had prioritized over her. Not out of vengeance. But because they had never truly considered her part of it to begin with. That evening, as she sat in her apartment, Madeline allowed herself a rare moment of stillness. She poured a glass of wine, leaned back against the plush sofa, and let the silence settle. She had expected to feel more, satisfaction, perhaps. A sense of triumph. But all she felt was relief. There was no victory lap. No desire to see the wreckage firsthand. She had done what needed to be done, and now, she was done with them. Her phone buzzed. A message from her mother. Please reconsider. Madeline stared at it for a long moment before deleting it without a reply. She wasn't reconsidering anything. By the time she left the office the next morning, the sun was rising over the city, casting a golden glow over the streets. For the first time in weeks, she felt a sense of lightness, of finality. She had reclaimed her life. And she wasn't looking back. Madeline had always measured success in absolutes, clear numbers, solid contracts, tangible victories. But as she stood in her office, watching the city stretch out beneath her, she realized that success, in its purest form, was sometimes just the quiet certainty that she had made it through. That she had endured. That she had won on her own terms. It had been weeks since the final pieces had fallen into place, since Nathan's career had collapsed under the weight of his own arrogance, since Jessica had lost everything she had so effortlessly taken, since her parents had been forced to confront the consequences of their choices. The house in Connecticut had been sold. Her parents had left the only life they had ever known, slipping away without the dignity they had so desperately clung to. They had tried to reach out once, an email from her father, a message from her mother, each one filled with careful words meant to rewrite history. But Madeline had let them go unanswered. Some things did not deserve revisiting. She turned away from the window and settled into her chair. Her desk was clear except for a single file, one she had been working on for months. Future projections, compliance initiative expansion. It was her vision, her work, a proposal that would redefine the company's approach to regulatory risk. If approved, it would be her legacy in the industry. And unlike the relationships she had left behind, this was something built on integrity. Her assistant, Emily, knocked lightly before stepping inside. Your itinerary for the week is on your desk. The board wants an update on the new compliance system rollout. Madeline nodded, flipping through the neatly organized agenda. Schedule a meeting for Thursday. And push my Friday afternoon back, I need some personal time. Emily hesitated for a fraction of a second. Of course. Madeline knew what she was thinking. She never took personal time. But then again, she had never allowed herself the space to. After Emily left, Madeline reached for her phone and scrolled through her contacts. Claire Donovan. An old friend from college, one she had lost touch with years ago when work had consumed her. Her fingers hovered over the message field before she finally typed. Are you still teaching that creative writing workshop? Thinking it's time I start something new. She hit send before she could overthink it. A notification flashed across her screen, a news article from a financial journal. Former investment analyst Nathan Carter denied senior position at Westwood Financial. She skimmed the article, unsurprised. His name had been whispered through just enough quiet conversations, just enough carefully placed reports, that firms no longer saw him as a safe bet. He had landed somewhere, far below where he had once envisioned himself, but that was not her concern. She closed the tab. Another notification. Nursing license suspension appeal rejected, Jessica Reynolds unable to resume practice. There it was. The final severance of ties. She had imagined, once, that she might feel something at the downfall of those who had betrayed her. Satisfaction, perhaps. A sense of righteousness. But all she felt was relief. She placed her phone down and leaned back in her chair, staring at the ceiling. What now? The question had lingered in the background, waiting for her to acknowledge it. Revenge had been precise, calculated. But it was not an identity. She thought about the things she had abandoned over the years. Interests set aside for practicality. Relationships neglected in the pursuit of success. The version of herself she had buried beneath obligation. A thought struck her. She picked up her phone, opening another app she hadn't touched in years, one for travel. A one-way ticket to Paris. She had spoken about it once, years ago, before life had gotten in the way. Someday, we'll go, Nathan had promised. Another lie, another empty dream meant to keep her tethered. This time, it would be hers alone. She clicked book. For the first time in years, she had nowhere to be but exactly where she wanted to go. Madeline stood by the floor-to-ceiling window of her new office, watching the city pulse with life beneath her. The glass reflected back a woman she barely recognized, not because she looked different, but because for the first time in years, she felt like herself. It had been 6 months since she had walked away from the wreckage of her past. 6 months since she had stopped fighting battles that were never meant to be hers. Outside, the streets were alive with movement, people rushing to deadlines, chasing ambitions, living lives dictated by urgency. She had spent years in that rhythm, defining herself by the next milestone, the next strategy, the next win. But for the first time, she was learning how to exist outside of survival mode. Her desk was almost empty, save for a single folder labeled Future Projections, Compliance Initiative Expansion. It was hers, her vision, her work, a project that would reshape how the company operated. It was no longer about proving herself. It was about building something that mattered. Her phone buzzed. A text from Claire. Yes. The workshop starts next month. I saved a spot for you. Madeline exhaled, a small, almost amused smile forming. She had said yes on impulse, but for the first time in years, she wanted to create something for herself, something that had nothing to do with balance sheets, corporate politics, or damage control. She reached for her coat, pausing only briefly as her eyes landed on the single-framed photograph on her desk. Not a wedding picture. Not a family portrait. Just her, standing on a hiking trail in Montana, taken years ago on a solo trip she had almost forgotten. She looked happy. Free. With one last glance at the city, she turned off the office lights and stepped into the hallway. She wasn't chasing closure anymore. She wasn't waiting for an apology that would never come. She wasn't proving anything to anyone. This wasn't an ending. It was just the beginning. At its core, Madeline's story is about self-worth, resilience, and the power of reclaiming one's life. It teaches that betrayal, no matter how devastating, does not define a person, their response to it does. Madeline does not succumb to despair or allow revenge to consume her. Instead, she strategizes, acts with precision, and rebuilds on her own terms. The story underscores the importance of knowing one's value and refusing to let others dictate it. Madeline spent years seeking validation from a family that never saw her, only to realize that the only approval she ever needed was her own. True strength lies not in holding on to toxic relationships, but in having the courage to walk away and start anew. It also challenges the illusion of security. Marriage, family, and social standing can all be fleeting if built on deception. The only true foundation is one's integrity and self-respect. Ultimately, Madeline's journey is a powerful reminder that losing the wrong people is never a loss. It is an opportunity to rebuild, to thrive, and to step into a future unburdened by the past. Sometimes, the best revenge is simply living well.